our podcast is an opportunity for us to explore the landscape of tutoring.
Right.
So we speak to different types of agencies and schools and tutors and students and organizations to sort of outlay the whole picture. So the podcast sort of exists to shed light on the whole landscape.
We're pretty strong in culture and setting a culture of autonomy and accountability.
Yeah.
And it's amazing what people can come up with. Can you imagine if we could look back in 10 years' time and think we collectively changed the culture of this country with regards to those who are chronically disengaged for good, for better?
I certainly can.
That's amazing, though, eh?
Welcome to the Qualified Tutor Podcast. I'm your host, Ludo Miller, and I'll be interviewing tutors and thought leaders from across the tutoring landscape to inspire, inform, and motivate you to become the best tutor you can be. The Qualified Tutor community is a safe and supportive space for tutors who love to learn and grow. We offer training, resources, ideas, and a chance to connect with like-minded tutors. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join our Qualified Tutor community at www.qualifiedtutorcommunity.org or find it in the show notes.
Diego, welcome. We are so pleased to have you on the podcast today. Diego Melo from Nudge Education and I are very excited about getting to know what our various services are and how we can put them together to make a real difference and really help the students that we're trying to support. Diego has a fascinating journey, which we'll discuss in just a minute, and is full of passion and vision for making a change to the children who really need it the most. So a great big welcome to you, Diego.
Thank you. I think it's good to be here. It's good to be here. Let's see what we get.
Yeah, let's see what comes out. So let's start with a lovely warm-up question, which is, tell us about who you were as a learner.
Quick, I think, very quick. Probably a very difficult student too, difficult learner. Independent, I think it's probably the word that causes, that has caused, tangenty, So I'd have a teacher trying to teach me about the solar system, and I'd be more interested in Mars in its entirety. I don't know. I just think that it's an interesting question. I don't think I've ever been asked that. I think I'm quite. I don't know. I think enjoy it. I don't see myself as a separate learner or a non-learner. I think the whole of life seems to be quite interesting to absorb. So I take everything in quite intensely. But yeah, I guess we might need to revisit that question once I've had a thought.
Okay, I'm happy to do that.
But I think for me, curiosity is the main thing. I think I'm curious. It's a what if, and actually joining the dots between all kinds of things that we know it's there, but we haven't quite made the connections between that and that. And then actually that and that will actually be quite a powerful, creative use of different tools. So I like the curiosity, the experimental thing. So it's good.
I think that's beautiful. I think that's really, really beautiful. And it cuts right to the chase of it, doesn't it? We had a participant on one of our cohorts who a couple of weeks ago said, we asked the same question at the beginning of the course, because it gets you into that reflective mode and empathetic to your students. And he said, as a student, he tried not to let his schooling get in the way of his education. He tried not to let his schooling get in the way of his education. And we found that a really, really powerful insight for a student to have, that the two things could be separated. So he enjoyed that really. We took a lot from that. So Diego, tell us about your professional background, please, because it's been quite a journey.
Yeah, well, my professional background, I can probably take it back to when I was about 12. So my parents were professionals in different fields, completely different fields. But I think having had a reasonably comfortable life in a country, Brazil, where you come face to face with brokenness and poverty, the moment you step out of your house, and in some cases within your own home, you may have somebody that may work for you that actually lives in a completely different world to yours. My parents joined forces with others to set up this halfway house. That was like an offshoot of a project in a rubbish dump. And what they found was that some of the kids who were working there, they had no mums, no dads. They actually didn't know how old they were or their actual names were. So technically, to the Brazilian government, we're talking like 25 years ago, they didn't really exist. They were born in the rubbish dump. They're going to be raised in the rubbish dump and then die in the rubbish dump, in that kind of environment. So we attended a church, and then the church was very concerned with making sure that wasn't the case for some people. So they bought in. It was a church full of middle class people, full of wealthy people, and there's nothing about class here. It's just the resources that were there, and they were utilized to make sure that those kids got an identity. So it's pre-registration. So they gave them an identity, trying to find out how old they were, that kind of thing. Then worked with some agencies to see whether they could be put through to a process of adoption, and then move away from that place of rubbish and to a place where. But in that process, there was this house. It used to be called my father's house, and in that process, we would teach them some basic skills, like brushing your teeth or gardening, whatever it is, pre-adoptions, or like. I mean, I don't see it as it's quite dramatic, but looking back, it's such a distant reality from this country. Even though I get to see some of the most broken things ever that I can come across in the UK, it's still a million miles away, because for those kids, like from the basics of developmentally speaking, the building blocks as we know it wasn't really there. So they were pretty much victims or players in their own environment, and that environment wasn't really good and sustained something pretty nasty. And in our views, I think the view that I grew up with is that childhood is quite precious. My childhood was amazing, including these experiences. But the main thing is, professionally speaking, I then got in touch with things like, I became face-to-face with things like welfare, education, international involvement and development. So we got all these kind of volunteers doing gap years coming to live in this farm that these guys from this particular community bought to get these kids out of that rubbish dump, give them an legal identity, and then get them ready for the process of adoption. It was almost like a halfway house, so to speak. And I think it was there that kind of my professional career kind of came to, came to the surface, and it sounds a bit weird, because actually professional means you've got some kind of a proxy, a degree, or, you've worked for certain organizations. But for me, it was more like, yes, that's when I thought, the world of education, the world of welfare, the world of volunteering, mobilization, came to be a thing for me. And then fast track to, just a couple of years later, I ended up studying a degree in social sciences, studied some youth work, then moved on to do a master's degree in education, then retracted back to the PGCE with a key focus on learning difficulties and disabilities. And funnily enough, it was actually during that process that I discovered that I was ADD, which is why I couldn't shut the fridge door. There's going to be a chapter in the book I'll write one day. It's called "Why Didn't I Shut the Fridge Door?"
It's really stayed with me. That it's really stayed.
Yeah. So it was like, the thing was my mum used to say that former housemates, people that I lived with in the past. What do you have a problem with closing things? And I used to get really annoyed by it. So then multiple sort of involvement with other sort of worlds, like the world of child and adolescents mental health services and their qualifications. It's a mixed bag really, from education to child psychology, and I guess a gritty sort of frontline kind of desire to be on the edges of where most people don't really want to be, really. So I think whatever qualification that is, I think that's my professional background. So I've worked, so from grammar schools, boarding grammar schools in the middle of Kent, all the way through to sexual health projects in really poor Sheffield's council estates, to tackling curb drinking with Barnardos and the Church of England across the northeast of England. So Barnardos, then taught in a few schools, then went to become, joined senior leadership teams in schools, a bit of assisting with the headship of a school. Then worked for a couple of other agencies, companies who were developing software around stakeholder engagement. How can schools become financially resilient by engaging their people in its life? So they becomes transactional rather than the school serving a community. The community is a school, and therefore it's about how we engage those stakeholders in that process. Money is probably a particular thing that we can get from it, but there's a whole load of other things. So that kind of movement-y type of approach to an institution.
Right.
Yeah. So we also built software to do it. It's an organization called Pebble, run by a guy called Ryan Green, who's actually one of our advisory board members at Nudge Education. And they're doing some fantastic work, helping schools become financially resilient in a time where everybody blames the government for not enough funding. There's enough to go around. We just got to get some of those building blocks right so that people can participate and give, not just financially. So I moved on, worked for some tutoring companies across the country, traveled quite a bit, being a specialist teacher, dealing with young people who are not engaged in education. And out of all of that mixed bag, came Nudge Education. So I guess again, not having properly thought this through, I think that's the best I can give you in terms of my professional background. Yeah.
So tell us about Nudge Education.
So Nudge Education is a breath of fresh air, really, for everyone who is vaguely or deeply concerned with young people, children and young people, whether they're 5, 10, 15 or 25, who've fractured away from the education sector in such a way that it's developed into a thing that is quite chronic. So we're looking at children have become long-term disengaged from the education system, not just the sector, but the system. That is an incredibly rich system for children, where so much growing takes place, So Nudge Education is also this movement of, it's a breath of fresh air for everyone, but it's a movement of like-minded professionals who believe in the power of human conductivity and that we should be professionally proximal instead of professionally distant from those guys. So, for example, I was, not long ago, at a very prominent city in the Midlands, and I sat with this family in the middle of this particular neighborhood. I didn't see a tree. I didn't see any grass. I walked into the house. Doors were the marks of people punching it. I sat there and the smell wasn't so welcoming to my particular perspective. What I saw was complete brokenness. So that's what we call professional proximity. We sit with it, we smell it, we live with it. We create that empathy at Nudge Education, where we can try as much as we can, as much as we were able to, really almost incarnate with that particular thing. And from that particular grassroots point, using whatever it is that we do, the technicalities, which everybody's done it anyway, things like sessions, plans, but it's that particular emphasis on we've got to embrace it as our own. It's all very well being sat in our kind of nice, clean education offices or whatever it is, but it's for nudge education is it's all about having the people out there where it matters, creating that conductivity with young people and their families, and then that professional proximity that then gives us an indication that what it is that it will take for us to repair that fracture. Right. So, and often what it takes is a really kind heart, an open mind, and and a comfortable shoulder, really, for people to lean onto. So nudge education is a breath of fresh air, but it's also a movement of like-minded professionals from these days from the Scottish borders, and sometimes over the Scottish borders, all the way through to the south coast, from Kent to Brighton to Gloucester to and everywhere else in between. It is fascinating, and it is taking its own shape. It's running wild. All we need to do is to run with it. Instead of trying to control it. So it's pretty amazing.
How long has Nudge been in existence, Diego? Give us a sense of the scope.
So I started Nudge education out of particular frustration with the way that we were looking after the most vulnerable. So let me rephrase it. I started Nudge education about 5 years ago, and I was a single, practitioner. That was just me. And I thought that I had a bit of a knack to engaging with those who couldn't necessarily engage with anybody else. I didn't know what it was about my practice that was effective. Now I do, with the help of others. We've unpacked not just my practice, but what it is about that informed my practice, the previous experiences and so on. But anyway, I went off for it. I went and then I worked with this boy in Middlesbrough 5 years ago. Let's call him Bob for now. And Bob was described to me as feral. And nobody can engage with him for more than 30 minutes before he, is potentially dangerous to self or others. Before I got there, he had previously harmed quite substantially an animal, a pet from the foster parents that he lived with. The poor dog had to have one of his legs amputated. So we're looking at a really hostile environment. So when you met with that kind of description, you expect that kind of behavior, don't you? I had to put myself in his shoes and thinking, actually, what's the story there? The story there is a boy who'd observed high levels of violence at home from day one. It was the only child out of three who was taken into care. He'd been in 3 different care placements. He was exposed to all kinds of horrific sexual events, and a child that used to have to fight his sister for a biscuit, which was a form of entertainment for dad and his friends to watch the two of them fight. Anyway, I thought so the boy who's feral and nobody can engage with, that's not the boy that I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about the boy that is broken and craving and has not known love yet, or potentially has not had fun or free play or whatever it is, autonomy in that process. Or actually the status that boy gets is a really low one. They may not understand as a status, but when you pass around like you do as a child, and of course, for the sake of safety sometimes, and within the limits of human capacity and patience, of course, people can't sit with something. But for that boy, it was hard. Life wasn't worth living. So I thought, what could be a life worth living? So I got a tool. I still do have like a whole load of bits and bobs in the boot of my car. I can always use as a called the third object in the room. So it's not about the two of us; it's about that thing that we're looking at. And the head teacher, who's still friends with us, she moved on to other local authorities, and she'd taken us with her kindly, which is great because we then become to have allies in that mission to eradicate chronic disengagement, which is what we're about. But anyway, so this boy comes to, she said, half an hour, if you can, half an hour. And she said, because I'd worked with her before, she said, just do your thing. I had no idea what the thing is. Bearing in mind, I was just coming out of an episode of depression and anxiety from a fractured relationship myself. So, there was common ground there, I thought, I was like, So I was a bit anxious about the whole process. I was like, will I underperform here? Well, just do your thing, Jake. I was like, I don't know what that thing is anymore,
Yeah.
So from that place of vulnerability, I guess I managed to, when I saw that boy, I was just like, to be honest, still gives me goosebumps. I saw a lot of what I wanted him to experience, So we just went to the park and played football. His social worker was with us, and she could not believe what was going on there. And we went from half an hour, then moved on to another bit of park, and then we had a bit of food. Then we visited a little lake. Then we fed some of the ducks, and it was just amazing. And we spent 6 hours. I wasn't really paid to do that amount of hours, and I was never paid for that, for the extra hours that was done. I was paid in far more valuable things, I guess. But because nobody was expecting, that's the main point. Nobody was expecting us to, or me to be able to, and I wasn't expecting that either. But something happened, and he was like that forever, to a point where, yes, he got he did an ASDAN, a couple of short qualification ASDAN. We upped his literacy and numeracy skills. Yes, we experienced lots and lots of really good attainment and attendance and all the stuff that really matters. But the most important thing for that particular first intervention 5 years ago was that I realized that what I was doing wasn't really teaching maths and English. I was helping children lift their heads above their particular problems, because they can do it. Children are incredibly resilient. The ones that we're raising in the West, not so much, but the ones who are, and in the war zones and in the villages, they're incredibly resilient, and they contribute economically, emotionally, culturally to families from the age of, whenever some sort of functionality in the brain and the body allows. So age of 2, 3, they're carrying things, helping parents, helping the older brothers. But here in the West, we don't quite think like that. But nonetheless, that boy went. So what I realized we were doing, through some reflection and some good coaching, I realized that what we're doing was helping young people imagine a life that's worth living. Okay. And then it was that became what nurture education is about. The world that we're trying to create is a world where no chronically disengaged child, chronic disengagement meaning a fracture that's a bit too nasty, that needs a bit of expert help, it's been going on for too long, will be left behind. And every single one of them will imagine a life that's worth living. And then in that particular world that we want to create, our mission is to get rid of this disease, which is chronic disengagement, children being left behind. Everyone's got a bit of a part to play in this. It's not about blaming which agency didn't do right or whatever, but it's to understand that collectively that system isn't optimally functioning without those children who are not there, the children who are not there. So they are an integral part of it. So the system will be hurting by the absence of those children. So by helping children imagine a future that they want to pursue, or a life worth living, what school makes complete sense, learning makes complete sense. It's not a barrier anymore. But then we need to give them and equip them with the tools that will kind of help them optimally function in those environments, but vice versa, give those environments the tools that will kind of enable them to engage with that. And it really is mostly changing our perspective on the role of the educator, really, which is a massive thing, which is why I'm excited about joining forces with the likes of Square Peg, Fran, who's looking to kind of influence a system that is wholesomely inclusive. instead of tokenistically so, and some others as well. But anyway, so from there, it went one student and this lovely head teacher called Julie Bunn from North Yorkshire at the moment. She's a force for good. That she's so strategic as well. She knows exactly what she's up to, and she's doing a world of good to the local authorities and children in care. Julie Bunn. So you went from 1, 2, 3, 4, and then somebody said, why don't you set an organization up? So I looked at the options. Again, independence as a learner was key. Accountable independence. It's not like just going off on one and disregarding all kinds of I guess realms of civil and criminal law. It's got to be accountable. It's got to be rooted in it's got to be connected. But to cut a long story short, I set Nudge up quite quickly. It took me a few seconds really to go on a website and register us as an entity, and we did it. And completed my forms. I've created my forms. Invited a colleague. I have a thing though. Somebody once said to me this. I have a slight. Not so much of a traditional believer, so to speak, but the nature of religious sort of kindness and human interaction is amazing. But somebody reminded me once that someone asked, so a historical figure, Christ, Jesus, however it is that we talk about, said when he sent the disciples to get a donkey, he didn't send one person, he sent two. So never do anything alone. It's better to do it together, which is why partnership is so important. There's a lot more in that interaction.
Right.
So I decided to invite Brian, who had a very comfortable full-time job managing large-scale contracts on behalf of people in welfare, back to work kind of thing. So trying to get people who are long-term unemployed or chronically unemployed, back to work. And we kind of we talked over a coffee, and we saw the start line here with a child that's fractured from the education sector, and what happened there at the end that he was managing, which was back to work.
Right.
He's trying to get people to work. It's all connected, and it's the same disease. It's the same disease. It's the disease of an imagination that has not been triggered to imagine what life could be for these guys. Because we know, though, by the evidence of I guess the anecdotal stories that we get in society of people who overcome incredible sort of difficulties. The main thing that you can get out of those stories is two things. There was somebody, and there was something that they wanted. Mm-hmm. There was somebody that helped them, and there was something that they really wanted to do, be a gymnast or an air pilot, or a brain surgeon. And so we went from 5 to 15, to actually quite a large number of, I'm not going to even attempt to tell you because I don't know, but I think we just went over this year a 200th intervention. So we're not an alternative provider. We're not a long-term solution. We are that reignition. We're like the AA service,
right?
Not the Alcoholic Anonymous, the Automotive Association.
Yeah.
Got that right. So
get back on the road.
So it's a bit like you've broken down. You've broken down. And have you ever broken down on the motorway before?
No,
Julia?
I did have that scary drive back from Luton recently.
You did. But it's horrible. Everybody's like zooming past. It's scary, and you're like, oh. And then you see that yellow van coming. Can you imagine what it feels like? Woo!
Yeah,
it's like hope, doesn't it? It feels like
hope.
And then we either get them back on the road straight towards their destination, or take them somewhere where they can be fixed if we don't have the expertise. But they will not be left on the side of the road. That's the main idea. They will not be left behind. So do you see? We do it already. We do it with vehicles. Let's do it with people.
It's beautiful. How do you do with people?
And we need a, and then I went into this whole world of imagining what it would this entity would look like. And then that was exciting because I could imagine something completely different from the way that we induct people and interview people through to all the way that we're delivering this. And then the next challenge was, how do you get, institutional or organizations nationally, like local authorities, who are risk averse, but who are craving exactly that thing that you've got to offer, but they're scared to sort of do that. And you can only do that through, again, human conductivity and professional proximity. To a point, yeah. So we're 5 years on, and we're just getting started.
It just occurred to me, Diego, what you are. You're a chronic engager.
Oh, right. Okay, chronic engagement. But you see, so we're just getting started. So the guys from Team Square Peg say that there's about 600 something thousand children not attending school in the UK. We knew that. We did do some digging, and it was great to see that we weren't far off from their figures. But within that, there's about 10% of that, or just over. It's about 11.5% of that are children who are chronically disengaged, and they're the ones that we really, really want to work with.
Right.
It's about 67,000 children who are chronically disengaged from education. These are transient children in the care sector whose education is actually majorly disrupted by our own inability to settle a child somewhere and give that child a particular chance to engage in education. And that's really, really unhelpful developmentally for a child. The moving around, as well as not having an education and sustaining friendships with others and so on, all kinds of things.
Right.
So so there's 67,000, and so we're just scratching the surface. What do we do this year? We'll probably do 0.2% of that work. So that also means, to me, maturing in that particular journey is we cannot do it on our own. There's no way. It can't be about Nudge Education deploying our education experts out in the fields. That is a part of that mission. The other mission moving forward is we've got to get more people on board with this. We've got to reimagine the way that we look after the ones who've become chronically disengaged. And the only way we can do that is to team up with people who've kind of got that same feel for it. They may have not named it the same way that we have, but they're working towards the same thing, like the guys from Team Square Peg. I think I've got that right. Fran and Ellie, two fantastic people. Yeah. That I've had the privilege to be introduced by you, actually, Julia.
Very happy to make such connections.
So Nudge Education, 5 years.
Diego, let's talk about your education experts. One of our warmest and most generous community members, Amanda Cremona, was the person who introduced Nudge to Qualified Tutor, because she is a person who was drawn to that kind of working that you're describing. So I think that a certain type of tutor, educator, a certain type of person who's listening to this will be drawn to hear how to become an education expert for Nudge, what qualities you're looking for, what the work would look like, how to know whether or not they'd be cut out for it, how to be sure that they'll get the support that they need to be successful, how to get over their own fear and anxiety, whether their vulnerability, because I'm hearing from what you're saying that your own life experience is what you bring to the table in these moments, your own vulnerability. So talk to us about who your education experts are, so that our listeners can know if it's a right fit.
Well, it's not for the faint-hearted, first of all.
Right.
It's about like you can't be expecting to be a GP in an A&E department, basically.
Right.
Let me put it like that.
Yeah.
So it's not for the for the pension waiters, class teachers, It could be for them too. But if that's your style of delivery, we're just not aligned. It's not that you're not right. You right somewhere else.
Right.
It's not we don't live in this binary world. You're either wrong.
Right.
It's just, there's no alignment.
That's right.
So you can't be expecting to deal with chronically disengaged children and not come to face with some pretty sometimes hostile or rejecting behavior. But let me just take you back a little bit on the education expert front and tell you how it works.
Yeah.
And why it works.
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell you a story of an intervention again.
Great.
So Jack and Mary Jane tell the story a lot. Sorry, you've probably heard them a couple of times. And if you're listening or watching this, you probably heard that again. It is true. And it is really powerful because it tells us something very critical about the way that we need to rethink the way that we deploy our workforce to work with these kinds of kids. And it's revolutionary because it goes all the way to the rounds of economics through to HR and everything else, and our beliefs on the kind of people that we should be deploying to work with them. So Jack was a child that had been chronically disengaged from education, probably from the age of 9. And it's when he observed a tragic event in his life of one of his parents overdosing in his living room, taken into care. Soon, mum disappears out of the face of the planet too. So there's only grandma and granddad, who then actually, being that kind of generation, embraces him. So he's still in care, but in contact with the grandma and granddad. Anyway, so a really traumatic or adverse childhood experiences all in there. Potentially, probably I'd argue, undiagnosed conditions such as potential FASD, the likes of fetal alcohol spectrum disorders there. So people kind of look at it as if being ADD or autism or this, but there's all kinds of things because it was quite complex, the background of that child. Anyway, so everybody tries to work with him, and everybody, when I say everybody, pretty much every other institution across the country tried to work with that boy, both in the area where he lived, but making him, moving him around the country. He comes back straight to the place where he belongs, which is a particular area of the northeast of England. And of course, being in care, there's a particular part of government called the virtual schools that will look after that child or the outcomes of that child. But, it was hard to engage with that boy. He was incredibly astute. He was really good with motorbikes and cars by the age of 13, and he could start any car you wanted for you. Give him a screwdriver and a hammer, and sort everything else for you. You find ways of getting the key that you locked yourself in your house in no time. And he used to probably take some things with him on his way out. But he was also so quick on his motorbikes that the police cars used to struggle to keep up with him, and he knew all the alleyways in the areas that he lived. So he had a lot of fun doing that. Probably like a very unsafe version of tag, really, that children experience, right? So criminality, yes, but is that different to slight experiences that a child has? Probably not. Hide and seek, we all have that particular thing. He just found that the interactions that he had with that particular world, was useful for that particular sort of experience that he wanted to have. I'm not advocating for children running away from police, but you can see the similarities of a child playing tag and the excitement of that, or hide and seek, with what that particular boy was doing. It was just done negatively and dangerously. But it's the same thing. Anyway, so Jack comes back to this area and meets, this particular people said, "Oh, we've got somebody who's going to work with you." And he was like, "I don't want it." He said, "F education, I don't really want it. I don't need it. What am I going to need this for?" What do you say to a child who says that? Anyway, so they said, but they have to, because they have to, and Ofsted's coming, and Ofsted comes and asks about this child. What about this child? And they hung, literally, this is what I was told. And then they say, well, we tried to engage with them, the council says to Ofsted, but it was really difficult. And we're talking about the education expertise. I'll get around to it. And then the council said, what about nudge? Which is annoying because we're nudge education. But nudge. What about nudge?
You should only have such problems, Diego. If the council are recommending you to schools, you're doing okay.
What about nudge? I mean, it wasn't schools. It was a virtual school. I mean, he wasn't enrolled. He'd not been enrolled with the school for so long. I mean, his literacy levels, once we got there, because we did. Anyway, I don't want to tell you about that. I'll tell you about the education experts. Anyway, but what happened for Jack was he would meet a lady called Mary Jane. Well, he was actually assigned by the local authority before Nudge to meet with a lady called Mary Jane, a fantastic human being. If you met her, you think, well, what a heart of gold you've got. Qualified teacher, all of that. All the proxies, all the really important things that gives us status that we forget about straight after my PGCE. I mean, there's so much that could change about a PGCE these days, I think, That's why I like the likes of Teach First and others who are kind of changing some of that concept and talking about leadership, resilience, and, creativity and neurology and stuff. But the traditional PGCE is still a bit dated back in the 1960s, really. So we've got to revolutionize that somehow eventually. Maybe we just have a free one, Julia, that everybody can join.
Sounds like fun. Sounds like fun.
Yeah, let's qualify our own teachers, not tutors only. Yeah. Anyway, so so what happened? Jack said, I don't want education. So what happens is Mary Jane is deployed as this out of school tutor for kids, within the local authority. And she goes there with, the best intentions, and she's up and she's ready and she's going to go. She gets there. So the first thing that Jack says is, you can get the out of here. She says, no, let's have a look. And Jack's workers goes, okay, let's have a look. So he sits down and says, he looks at the worksheet and he goes, this is shit. And she was like, oh no, let's give it a go. He's like, no, I don't want to. What happens at the end of, to cut a long story short, he tells us where to go even more assertively and wipes everything out of the table. And that's when they go, maybe we need to get Nudge in. Nudge then deploys a guy called Arthur, who is an ex-head teacher, but then had become a carpenter, but also was brought up in the same kind of world that Jack was brought up in. So there's proximity already there. But there's a guy who imagined a future for himself. He became a professional celloist, traveled the world, seen all that kind of stuff. He actually made himself out of that potential chronic situation. There's all kinds of other things that, of course, that influence Arthur. But Arthur, the main thing is that Arthur showed up with a chainsaw, with a petrol chainsaw. Nothing would get that boy more excited than kind of petrol and engines. And they built a shed in a day.
Yes.
And Arthur then did an initial assessment with him at the particular point, which made us realize that his reading age his literacy levels were as somebody at the age of 8, 9, by the age of 14.
Right.
His numeracy levels were a bit better because he just knew how to divide up, like you get an ounce of weed and break that down and potentially sell them on, that kind of stuff. So there's some kind of, applied numeracy skills there.
Right.
It's, again, we think of children not being able to contribute economically. As wild as this may be, a lot of our broken ones, a lot of our disconnected, disengaged ones are contributing to a particular system, through county lines or whatever it is. They are incredibly active. We're just failing to engage them and help them imagine what a good life could look like, and what a life worth living could look like. But they're doing it. It's about kind of coming alongside and saying, could this be it? They're doing it. They're doing it. They're doing it all over. Sometimes it's our own children in our nicely organized world that aren't doing it, which is why when they get to certain places like uni, in some cases, they're like, oh, they crumble or they go wild because, they've not done that to begin with. It's all sheltered. It's all nice and catered for, which is good in some cases. Anyway, so Arthur gets along with Jack. In no time, it was an immediate connection. There was immediate conductivity. Of course, Arthur had a really good look at the profile of that student. So did we, which is why we didn't send Beth. We sent Arthur.
Right.
Arthur had the potential to create that conductivity with Jack. He was also able to bring in skilled elements to that particular learning intervention, education interventions that would connect both heart and mind of that child and potentially ignite that thinking to imagine a future that is worth pursuing. So our education experts are people who come from a variety of backgrounds. So we've had ex-chief police constables, we've had MMA fighters, DJs, models, all with an interest in education, of course. Some of them were qualified teachers, some of them was ex-probation officers, but we've also got child psychologists, child mental health practitioners, youth workers, play workers, and they all come in and join as education experts because their job will be to use their expertise to re-engage that child in the curiosity of learning, primarily with the aim of getting that child to imagine a life that is worth living. And they are young, they are old, they're black, they're white, they are Christian, they are Muslims, they are this, they are that, it's a lot. And everyone's got that particular thing that they find it really difficult right there to name it, which is that desire to go and say, you'll not be left behind. And I'll do whatever it takes, roll up those sleeves, and I'll do whatever it takes to get down and dirty and sort this out. It's like being in A&E, like blood flowing in your face, but that person is saved. Let's put them to rest somewhere else and recover. So that crisis engagement is over. So those are education experts. Yeah. Do we have qualified teachers? Some people may ask. Yeah, like the majority of people are qualified teachers. Do you have youth workers? Yes, we have lots of them. In fact, it may be an intervention, there may be an education intervention that is led by a youth worker and supported by a teacher, whereby because that child needs to connect with that youth worker has a better chance of doing that and the skills doing that, or potentially that youth worker is just well into horse riding. That teacher isn't. We'll combine that to make that particular sort of intervention work for that child. Where do we work from? That's the other thing. Our education experts are, like, by default, aware that the world, our immediate communities, and our neighborhoods potentially are our super resourceful sensory
classrooms.
Sensory classrooms, yeah, or like. But it's for everyone. If you want a quiet space, there's a park we can go to.
Yeah.
If you want to work with animals, there's an urban farm.
Yeah.
And actually, it's in that way of thinking that we're able to get young people moving. Because actually, taking a young person from a bedroom to a classroom isn't really that innovative, is it? It's not really that sensory. It's not going to inspire sort of potential for a chronically disengaged child. Is not going to inspire or incite or excite the brain, is it? You go from one room to another, one room doing something you really like, actually potentially gaming, to doing something you're actually just being told to do. And because you suffer from depression and anxiety, you're just going to say yes. But actually the issue here isn't doing that particular worksheet. The issue here is about you moving away from that place of seclusion and exclusion to a place where life is worth living. And sometimes a classroom isn't just a place for that. We need to be more creative. So anyway, I'm going off on one.
No.
Education experts, in a nutshell, our education experts are people who, from a variety of backgrounds, who can be deployed in a way that they will find that life is worth living. Going back to Mary Jane and Jack, do you think that Mary Jane enjoyed that? She didn't. What if you compare the experience of engaging with Jack between Mary Jane and Arthur? Arthur loved it.
Yeah.
Mary Jane found it really difficult.
Yeah.
So we wanted to give our education experts the opportunity to find themselves a life that is worth living within their career path. So it's a place for co-learning, really.
That's beautiful. I think the other thing that struck me about that first moment with Mary Jane and Arthur's first moment is you have to get the first moment right with a student like that if you're going to inspire them, don't you? Coming in with a chainsaw it will have straight away piqued Jack's interest where a worksheet won't have. And so I'm pretty sure that your education experts will be thinking out of the box from the first moment.
They're certainly invited to, I don't think it was Mary Jane's problem. Mary Jane was never part of a platform that gave her that autonomy.
Right.
In fact, Mary Jane was always part of a platform that gave her red tape. And red tape for particular groups like schools are fine because it's controlled, really. We're looking at large numbers of students. For a particular student, when we talk about being bespoke, we need to create a different culture for the people who are working in that particular environment that doesn't mirror the mainstream education. But at the moment, it's like we've got all these policies and practices, and when that's happened with the kids, we're not engaging with mainstream anyway. So we're pretty strong in culture and setting a culture of autonomy and accountability. Yeah. And it's amazing what people can come up with when you do.
If you give them permission, you give them the parameters, and then you give them permission to be creative and find what works. What we speak to tutors a lot about being responsive and finding out where your student's up to, not just academically, but in terms of readiness to learn, and then starting from there. And sometimes what you want to do is create some quick wins, don't you? Place some low-hanging fruit for them to feel successful and jumpstart that positive cycle.
Yep.
Diego, will you come back and do this again for us, please? Because I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah. So for anybody listening to this, if you want to join us in whatever capacity you want. Sorry to jump in with a pitch, but Julia, it's great to have you join us in the way that you do, and let's just imagine a world where, can you imagine if we could look back in 10 years' time and think we collectively changed the culture of this country with regards to those who are chronically disengaged for good, for better.
Certainly can. I certainly can.
That's amazing, though, eh? And we're trying to figure it out because we're all responsible in the grand scheme of things. We're not. We're all trying to do good,
That's right.
So.
And we have to do it together.
I think so.
We have to do it together. We have to all put our shoulder to the wheel, and channel this and make learning for all students bespoke.
Yeah, I'm all for that. But my main, just like when I was 12, and the guy in the rubbish dump, for me, they were left behind and didn't really exist. My passion is still for those who are chronically disengaged. It's the few, not the many. It's for the least, the last, and the lost in our sector almost. That's what nudge education is all about. And there's about 67,000 of them. There's no way a single organization like Nudge Education will eradicate that disease out of the sector, chronic disengagement, that is. So, let's make it bespoke for everyone, but let's get behind those who are being left behind. We'll be better people, It will be, it's good for everyone.
It's good for everyone. It's beautiful. Thank you for your time, Diego. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's so precious to hear your voice.
Thanks for listening to the Qualified Tutor Podcast, where tutors share their expertise to support the tutoring community. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join our Qualified Tutor community at www.qualifiedtutorcommunity.org or find it in the show notes below. We exist to connect, share, and learn with you because tutoring is a small job that makes a big difference.